The Boy Who Broke the Bank by Ruskin Bond. This short story is a hyperbole. Hyperbole means exaggeration. Yes, it's a figure of speech. So this short story is a hyperbole which tells us that how rumors affect our economy. Yes, friends and children, all those who are listening to this. Here, broke the bank simply means the bank became cashless, bankrupt. And how these rumors, how child labor, how the insecurity of poor people, they lead to a downfall in an economy. So right now it is the preface from the textbook. The Boy Who Broke the Bank, Ruskin Bond, in a deftly worded hyperbole, shows us the damage a carelessly spoken word can wreak. The story is almost allegorical in its narrative. It revolves around how one person tells another that there is no money in the bank. This news spreads rapidly from one person to another, each adding his or her own interpretation. The opinion becomes more important than the facts. The truth gets hidden and then lost. The plight of children forced to work, the frightening effect of rumors and untruths finds powerful expression in this story. So let's start with the story now. The Boy Who Broke the Bank by Ruskin Bond. Nathu grumbled to himself as he swept the steps of the People Nagar Bank owned by Seth Govindaram. He used the small broom hurriedly and carelessly, and the dust, after rising in the cloud above his head, settled down again on the steps. As Nathu was banging his pan against a dustbin, Sitaram, the washerman's son, passed by. Sitaram was on his delivery round. He had a bundle of freshly pressed clothes balanced on his head. "Don't raise such dust," he called out to Nathu. "Are you annoyed because they are still refusing to pay you an extra 2 rupees a month?" "I don't wish to talk about it," complained the sweeper boy. "I haven't even received my regular pay, and this is the 20th of the month. Who would think a bank would hold up a poor man's salary? As soon as I get my money, I am off. Not another week I work in this place." And Nathu banged the pan against the dustbin several times just to emphasize his point and giving himself confidence. "Well, I wish you luck," said Sitaram. "I'll keep a lookout for any job that might suit you." And he plodded barefoot along the road, the big bundle of clothes hiding most of his head and shoulders. At the fourth home he visited, Sitaram heard the lady of the house mentioned that she was in need of a sweeper. Tying his bundle together, he said, "I know of a sweeper boy who's looking for work. He can start from next month. He's with the bank just now, but they aren't giving him any pay, and he wants to leave." "Is that so?" said Mrs. Srivastava. "Well, tell him to come and see me tomorrow." And Sitaram, glad that he had been of service to both a customer and his friend, hoisted his bag on his shoulders and went his way. Mrs. Srivastava had to do some shopping. She gave instructions to the ayah about looking after the baby and told the cook not to be late with the midday meal. Then she set out for the People Nagar marketplace to make her customary tour of the cloth shops. A large shady tamarind tree grew at one end of the bazaar, and it was here that Mrs. Srivastava found her friend Mrs. Bhushan, sheltering from the heat. Mrs. Bhushan was fanning herself with a large handkerchief. She complained of the summer, which she affirmed was definitely the hottest in the history of People Nagar. She then showed Mrs. Srivastava a sample of the cloth she was going to buy, and for 5 minutes they discussed its shade, texture, and design. Having exhausted this topic, Mrs. Srivastava said, Do you know, my dear, that Seth Govindram's bank can't even pay its employees? Only this morning, I heard a complaint from their sweeper who hasn't received his wages for over a month. Shocking, remarked Mrs. Bhushan. If they can't pay the sweeper, they must be in a bad way. None of the others could be getting paid either. She left Mrs. Srivastava at the tamarind tree and went in search of her husband, who was sitting in front of Kamal Kishore's photographic shop talking with the owner. So there you are, cried Mrs. Bhushan. I have been looking for you for almost an hour. Where did you disappear? Nowhere, replied Mr. Bhushan. Had you remained stationary in one shop, I might have found you. But you go from one shop to another like a bee in a flower garden. Don't start grumbling. The heat is trying enough. I don't know what's happening to People Nagar. Even the bank's about to go bankrupt. What's that? Said Kamal Kishore, sitting up suddenly. Which bank? Why, the People Nagar Bank, of course. I hear they have stopped paying employees. Don't tell me you have an account there, Mr. Kishore. No, but my neighbor has, he exclaimed, and he called out over the low partition to the keeper of the barber shop next door. Deepchand, have you heard the latest? The People Nagar Bank is about to collapse. You did better get your money out as soon as you can. Now Deepchand, who was cutting the hair of an elderly gentleman, was so startled that his hand shook and he nicked his customer's right ear. Ah! The customer yelped with pain and distress. Pain because of the cut and distress because of the awful news he had just heard. With one side of his neck still unshaven, he sped across the road to the general merchant's store, where there was a telephone. He dialed Seth Govindram's number. The Seth was not at home. Where was he then? The Seth was holidaying in Kashmir. Oh, was that so? The elderly gentleman did not believe it. He hurried back to the barber shop and told Deepchand, "The bird has flown. Seth Govindram has left town. Definitely it means a collapse." And then he dashed out of the shop, making a beeline for his office and checkbook. The news spread through the bazaar with the rapidity of the forest fire. From the general merchant, it travelled to the shop, circulated amongst the customers, and then spread with them in various directions to the beetle seller, the tailor, the free vendor, the jeweler, the beggar sitting on the pavement. Old Ganpat the beggar had a crooked leg. He had been squatting on the pavement for years, calling for alms. In the evening, someone would come with a barrow and take him away. He had never been known to walk, but now, on learning that the bank was about to collapse, Ganpat astonished everyone by leaping to his feet and actually running at top speed in the direction of the bank. It soon became known that he had 1,000 rupees in savings. Men stood in groups at street corners discussing the situation. People Nagar seldom had a crisis. Seldom or never had floods, earthquakes or drought, and the imminent crash of the People Nagar Bank set everyone talking and speculating and rushing about in a frenzy. Some boasted of their farsightedness, congratulating themselves on having already taken out their money or on never having put any in. Others speculated on the reasons for the crash, putting it all down to excesses indulged in by Seth Govindram. The Seth had fled the state, said one. He had fled the country, said another. Oh, he was hiding in People Nagar, said a third. He had hanged himself from the tamarind tree, said the fourth, and had been found that morning by the sweeper boy. By noon, the small bank had gone through all its ready cash and the harassed manager was in a dilemma. Emergency funds could only be obtained from another bank some 30 miles distant, and he wasn't sure he could persuade the crowd to wait until then. And there was no way of contacting Seth Govindram on his houseboat in Kashmir. People were turned back from the counters and told to return the following day. They did not like the sound of that, and so they gathered outside on the steps of the bank shouting, "Give us our money or we will break in, and fetch the Seth. We know he is hiding in a safe deposit locker." Mischief makers who didn't have a paisa in the bank joined the crowd and aggravated their mood. The manager stood at the door and tried to placate them. He declared that the bank had plenty of money but no immediate means of collecting it. He urged them to go home and come back the next day. "We want it now," chanted some of the crowd. "Now, now, now!" And a brick hurtled through the air and crashed through the plate glass window of the People Nagar Bank. Nathu arrived next morning to sweep the steps of the bank. He saw the refuse and broken glass and the stones cluttering the steps. Raising his hands in a gesture of horror and disgust, he cried, "Hooligans? Sons of donkeys? As though it isn't bad enough to be paid late. It seems my work has also to be increased." He smote the steps with his broom, scattering the refuse. "Good morning, Nathu," said the washerman's boy, getting down from his bicycle. "Are you ready to take up the new job from the 1st of next month? You'll have to, I suppose, now that the bank is going to be out of business." "How is that?" said Nathu. "Haven't you heard? Well, you'd better wait here until half the population of People Nagar arrives to claim their money." And he waved cheerfully. He did not have a bank account and sped away on his cycle. Nathu went back to sweeping the steps. Muttering to himself, when he had finished his work, he sat down on the highest step to await the arrival of the manager. He was determined to get his pay. Who would have thought the bank would collapse? He said to himself, and looked thoughtfully into the distance. I wonder how it could have happened. So children, that was the chapter. And now for some explanation or some easy tricks to remember for exam. The theme of this chapter is exploitation of the poor. This whole story is ironic. Why? Simply because a sweeper, a boy who does not even have a bank account, is the reason for the People Nagar Bank collapse. Now, in this chapter, you have to know the flow of the rumor. Yes? Firstly, Nathu, who is the sweeper at the People Nagar Bank, is not being paid. So he complains this to Sitaram. Now, Sitaram is a washerman's son. So he delivers ironed clothes to all his customers. And he wants to help, or rather give his service to both his customer and his friend. That is Nathu. So when he goes, he visits Mrs. Shrivastava, which is the fourth house, comes to know that Mrs. Shrivastava needs a sweeper boy. And so he recommends Nathu. The reason he gives is the bank cannot pay him. Now Mrs. Shrivastava goes for shopping, and then she tells this to Mrs. Bhushan under a tamarind tree, where they both are saving themselves from the scorching heat. Now Mrs. Bhushan tells this to Mr. Bhushan. Actually, Mrs. Bhushan is grumbling on Mr. Bhushan and complains that nothing is stable and nobody knows what is happening to People Nagar. In that, she tells that even the bank is about to go bankrupt. Now, when Mrs. Bhushan is telling this to Mr. Bhushan, the next person, that is Kamal Kishore, he sits up suddenly. Now, Kamal Kishore tells this to Deep Chand, the barber, the next door. Now, Deep Chand, who was cutting the hair of an elderly gentleman, that is his customer, he yells with pain and rushes to the opposite store to dial Seth Govindram's number, as he knows, and he wants to confirm, he wants to know the fact. But well, nature plays cruel jokes. Seth Govindram is holidaying in Kashmir. He was at a houseboat and he was not reachable. And this serves as a clue for Deepchand, who starts yelling that the bird has flown. Seth Govindram has left town. So here we see a typical passing of messages, how it goes from one person to another with its own interpretation. And then it spreads like wildfire. Yes, and that's the whole paragraph which everybody has to learn. Other things to learn is an exaggeration of the beggar. Well, in today's era, we all know all beggars have bank accounts. So old Ganpat, the beggar who had a crooked leg, he runs on his feet. He leaps to his feet and starts running. Yes, a little bit of comedy. Another thing is the speculations. The people who start speculating, "Arey ye hua hoga, arey wo hua hoga, this might have happened, that might have happened." So there's a whole paragraph where the men who normally stood up in groups at street corners, they discuss the situation of the People Nagar bank. So you have to know all the speculations and it comes as a question. Then you can also learn the instructions that Mrs. Srivastav she gives to the maid, and of course character sketch of 3 persons: Nathu, the sweeper, Sitaram, his friend, and Mrs. Srivastav, from where this rumor starts. And not to forget the significance of the title, The Boy Who Broke the Bank. The pun intended, broke the bank. Yes? Hope this audiobook helps you all. Keep listening to this audiobook and other audiobooks that I have put on my channel. Keep listening, children, again and again and again. And trust me, you will remember everything. I hope you all know that I conduct classes, online classes. So if you all wish to study with me online and save on the transportation, do let me know. All right. Connect with me for any doubts. Thank you and all the best.